Hey, everyone. Before we dive into today's intense story, I want to ask you, where are you all from? Drop a comment below and let me know. I love hearing from all of you, and it helps me connect with this amazing community we're building here on Unheard Stories. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join us for more shocking stories like today's. If you love tales of betrayal, secrets, and revenge, you're in the right place. So, sit tight, because what you're about to hear will leave you speechless. Today's story is one of the deepest betrayals you can imagine. It's about a man who thought he had the perfect life. Everything was set. A loving wife, a beautiful home, a future built together. But what happens when the one person you trust with everything shatters your world? It's the story of Ethan, a man who lived a dream life with his wife Sarah. They had been together for years, trusting, loving, and building a future together. But behind closed doors, Sarah's world was not what Ethan thought. The reality of their marriage began to crumble in ways he could never have predicted. When Ethan discovers the truth, he's not just heartbroken. He's forced to confront the darkest side of betrayal, a betrayal that takes him down a path he never imagined. In this story, we'll explore how trust can be broken, how love can turn to ashes, and how revenge can become the only thing that keeps you moving forward. Ethan's emotional journey takes him from heartbreak to fury, from helplessness to cold calculation. And by the end of it, Ethan won't just reclaim his life. He'll show Sarah the consequences of her actions in a way she could never imagine. Ethan had always prided himself on having a stable, successful life. He worked hard as a marketing executive, climbing the corporate ladder, securing promotions, and building a future that he could share with the one person who meant the most to him, Sarah. They had been high school sweethearts, and when they finally moved in together after graduation, everything seemed to fall into place. The chemistry between them was undeniable, and Ethan often found himself thinking that he had the perfect woman by his side. Sarah was kind, beautiful, and ambitious in her own way. She had a dream of becoming a graphic designer, and Ethan supported her every step of the way, believing in her talents and pushing her to follow her dreams. Together, they had created a life that anyone could envy, a perfect blend of love, work, and mutual respect. They spent their weekends doing the things they loved, hiking in the mountains, visiting farmers' markets, and enjoying cozy dinners at home. Their friends often joked that they were the ideal couple, always seen together, always happy. They made it look easy. Ethan always felt like he had everything he needed right in front of him. Sarah was his rock, his partner in everything. Whether it was navigating tough work situations or celebrating small victories, they were there for each other. As the years went by, they built a home together, literally and metaphorically. Ethan was busy with work, but he made sure to come home early every Friday so they could spend their weekend together. They would cook dinner, watch old movies, and talk about their week. Sarah would listen attentively, offering advice or simply being the comforting presence he needed. He admired her ability to balance everything so effortlessly. But as much as they shared, there were things about Sarah that Ethan didn't know. They had always been open with each other, or so he thought, but slowly, Sarah began to drift in ways he couldn't explain. She started spending more time out of the house, working late on freelance projects, meeting friends he didn't know, and going on long runs. She told him she was just focused on her career, but Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing. Sarah's once frequent affection had started to fade. The late-night talks, the random text messages, the small gestures of love, those had all started to become less frequent. At first, Ethan told himself it was nothing. She was probably just stressed from work or feeling overwhelmed. Maybe she was busy pursuing her dreams, just like she had always wanted. But deep down, something gnawed at him. He began to notice subtle shifts in her behavior. Sarah was always on her phone, more so than usual. She would quickly close it when he walked into the room, and sometimes, she'd leave the room to take a call or respond to a text. Ethan never thought much of it at first. He trusted Sarah. Why would she betray him? After all, they had built their relationship on a foundation of trust. But as the weeks turned into months, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. In the evenings, when they would sit on the couch together, Sarah seemed distracted. Her thoughts weren't with him anymore. She was quieter, more distant. Her gaze would wander, her mind elsewhere, and Ethan felt a cold distance between them that wasn't there before. He tried to brush it off, but the discomfort lingered. It wasn't until one evening, when Sarah came home a little later than usual, her face flushed, her eyes slightly more nervous than he had ever seen, that Ethan realized something had changed. She claimed she had been out for a run, but there was something about her that seemed off. Her hurried movements, the way she fumbled with her keys, her forced smile, it all felt wrong, but Ethan couldn't put his finger on it. At that moment, a quiet doubt started to creep into Ethan's mind. Could Sarah be hiding something from him? Could she really be the person he thought she was? For weeks, Ethan tried to push aside the growing unease in his gut. He couldn't quite explain it, but something felt different about Sarah. Their conversations had become less personal, more about the surface-level details of the day. She was distracted more often than not, and he began to feel like he was losing touch with her. The affection he once received so freely had slowly disappeared. It wasn't just her behavior. He also started to notice things around the house. Little things like her phone left lying around more often, or the way she would quickly step out of the room to take a call, as if it were a reflex. Ethan tried to ignore it. He convinced himself that she was just under stress. She had so much going on with her freelance work, and perhaps she just needed some space. But deep down, he knew something wasn't right. The turning point came one afternoon when Ethan came home early from work. He had planned to surprise Sarah, take her out for dinner, something to reignite the spark they once had. But when he stepped inside, he immediately noticed the absence of the usual warmth that filled the house. The lights were dim, and Sarah's phone sat unattended on the coffee table. Curious, Ethan picked it up. She had always left her phone lying around, never trying to hide it. As he unlocked it, a flood of messages immediately appeared on the screen, each one more disturbing than the last. They were from Daniel, the same man who had been a fixture in Sarah's life for the past several months, though Ethan never thought much of him. At first, the messages were casual, nothing alarming. But as Ethan scrolled through, he saw things that made his heart stop. One message stood out in particular. "I miss you so much, Sarah. Can't wait to be with you tonight." The words felt like a punch to the gut. Ethan felt lightheaded. The world around him seemed to blur. How long had this been going on? How could Sarah do this to him? His mind raced as he searched through more messages, each one confirming what he didn't want to believe. Sarah had been seeing Daniel for months, sneaking around behind Ethan's back, lying to him every day. The trust he thought they shared, the foundation of their relationship, had been built on nothing but lies. Suddenly, it all made sense. The late nights, the secretive phone calls, the odd glances. Everything clicked into place, but none of it made the situation any easier to bear. Ethan's chest tightened, and his hands shook as he dropped the phone back onto the table. He could feel his anger building, the hurt and disbelief boiling inside him. But more than anything, he felt crushed. He felt stupid for not seeing the signs earlier. He had trusted Sarah completely. He had loved her with everything he had, and she had betrayed him. For the next few hours, Ethan was in a daze. He couldn't think straight. He replayed every moment in his head. Their conversations, their shared experiences, every time he had defended her, trusted her. How long had she been hiding this affair? When had she stopped loving him? As the reality of the betrayal settled in, a sense of numbness washed over him. He was heartbroken, but he was also angry, furious. Ethan was a man of control, but the rage inside him was growing by the second. The more he thought about it, the more determined he became. He wasn't going to let this go. He wasn't just going to walk away and let her have the life they built together. No, he would make her feel the pain he was feeling. She would know what it was like to lose everything. But first, he had to confront her. He had to hear her admit to what he already knew. He had to look into her eyes as she lied, because he knew that's exactly what she would do. Ethan took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. His hands were still shaking, but the anger inside him was starting to settle into a cold, calculating rage. He wasn't going to make a scene. No, his revenge would be much more devastating than that. Sarah would pay, but not in a way she expected. That evening, Sarah came home later than usual. Ethan had spent hours thinking about what he would say, how he would confront her. He was no longer the naive, trusting husband who had been in love with the woman he thought he knew. No, the man standing in front of Sarah now was someone different. Someone who had been broken but was determined to make sure she understood the consequences of her actions. When Sarah walked in, she seemed surprised to find him waiting for her. She had no idea that Ethan knew. She smiled at him, but Ethan couldn't bring himself to smile back. "I was thinking we could go out for dinner," Ethan said flatly, his voice colder than she had ever heard it. "You know, celebrate the weekend?" Sarah looked at him, confused. "I'm a little tired," she said, looking down at her phone as if she were searching for an excuse. Ethan felt his patience slip. "I'm sure you are," he said, walking toward her. He picked up the phone from the table, holding it out in front of her. Sarah's face instantly drained of color when she saw what Ethan was holding. The text messages from Daniel were still on the screen, each one a painful reminder of the betrayal. She opened her mouth to speak, but Ethan stopped her. "I know everything, Sarah," he said, his voice steady but full of emotion. "You don't need to explain. I already know." The silence between them was deafening. Sarah looked at him with wide eyes, her face crumpling as guilt and fear set in. She tried to reach for him, but Ethan stepped back, his expression unreadable. "You've been lying to me for months, behind my back. I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me? With lies, with betrayal?" His voice grew colder, filled with controlled fury. "You don't get to explain yourself. Not anymore." Ethan watched as Sarah's face twisted with guilt, regret, and fear. But it was too late. The damage had been done, and she would never be able to take it back. Ethan's heart had been shattered, but it was no longer about the pain. It was about justice, and the next step would be his revenge. The confrontation with Sarah had left Ethan in a haze of anger and disbelief. He had expected her to react with guilt, maybe even beg for forgiveness, but what he didn't expect was the cold emptiness that filled him after she left the room. She hadn't apologized. She hadn't even tried to explain. Instead, she had cried, pleaded for him to understand, but Ethan knew the truth. She didn't regret what she had done. She regretted getting caught. For the next few days, Ethan walked around in a fog. His mind was consumed with the thought of Sarah and Daniel, and the deep sense of betrayal gnawed at his soul. The pain felt unbearable at times. He would catch himself staring off into the distance, thinking about the lies that had been told to him every single day. The house, once full of laughter and warmth, now felt cold, empty, and foreign. Ethan couldn't understand how Sarah, the woman he had given everything to, could betray him so completely. What had happened to the love they shared? Had it all been a lie? And how could she not have seen the damage she was causing? He had trusted her with his heart, and she had shredded it. Anger, however, was the only thing that kept him moving. The pain was unbearable, but the rage inside him was stronger. His emotions fluctuated between sadness and fury. He couldn't cry for what he had lost. He wasn't that kind of man. But the desire for justice, for retribution, was growing stronger every day. He needed to make Sarah feel the same way he felt, the same crushing weight of betrayal. He wanted her to suffer. The next few days were spent in a numb haze as Ethan plotted his next move. He knew he couldn't just let this go. He couldn't walk away and pretend it didn't matter. This was about more than just revenge. It was about taking control of his life again. Ethan wasn't a man who dealt with loss well. He was the kind of person who always fought back, who didn't let anyone walk all over him. And right now, Sarah had walked all over him, and he wasn't going to let her get away with it. Ethan spent hours thinking about what he would do next. He could confront Sarah again, scream at her, demand answers, but what good would that do? She had already shown him who she was. No amount of words could undo what had happened. No, Ethan needed something more. He needed to make her regret her actions in a way that would leave a permanent mark on her. He wasn't just angry at Sarah. He was furious at the situation he had found himself in. He wanted her to feel everything he felt. He wanted to show her how deeply her betrayal had wounded him, how it had shattered the life they had built together. But revenge wasn't just about making someone feel the pain you feel. It was about taking away something they valued, something they took for granted. And in Sarah's case, it wasn't just their relationship. It was her image, the perfect life she had carefully crafted. Ethan would destroy that image piece by piece. He started planning. Ethan had learned from his mistakes. He knew he couldn't be impulsive or reckless. He would make Sarah's betrayal public, not just to her, but to everyone. Her friends, her family, everyone who admired her for the loving wife she pretended to be. Ethan would expose her lies, but he wouldn't do it in some angry outburst. He would do it quietly, carefully. He would expose her, but only in a way that would make her feel humiliated. He knew how much her reputation meant to her, and that would be the key to his revenge. The next step was to gather more evidence. He spent hours going through Sarah's social media accounts, digging through her emails, and looking at the places they had visited together. He even started following her movements more closely, pretending nothing was wrong. Sarah had no idea that Ethan was watching her every move. Ethan knew he couldn't expose Sarah's affair directly. It would be too easy. He had to make sure that it wasn't just about the affair. He needed to make her feel the consequences in the most public way possible, so everyone could see how far she had fallen. He started looking for ways to use Sarah's own secrets against her. There was an upcoming party, one where all of their closest friends and family would be present. It would be the perfect opportunity. Ethan knew that Sarah had planned to attend with Daniel, and that was his chance. He began to formulate a plan, one where Sarah's affair would be revealed not just as a private mistake, but as a public scandal. Ethan wasn't sure how it would go, but he had a feeling that this would be the final piece in the puzzle that would shatter Sarah's world. He would make sure she would never be able to go back to the life she had before, the life built on lies. The more Ethan thought about it, the more conflicted he became. Part of him wanted to just walk away, to pack up and leave it all behind. He could go to a new city, start over. But the idea of letting Sarah get away with everything she had done to him made his blood boil. He couldn't let it go. This wasn't just about the affair. It was about the disrespect, the lies, and the manipulation. Sarah had torn apart everything he had trusted, and Ethan wasn't going to let her leave unscathed. The emotional turmoil was overwhelming at times. There were moments when he wanted to break down, scream at the injustice, and let the world know how much it hurt. But deep down, he knew this wasn't just about pain, it was about power. And if he played his cards right, he would be the one who controlled the narrative, not Sarah. With every passing day, his determination grew stronger. Ethan was no longer the man he once was. He had been forced to confront a painful truth about his marriage, but he was also ready to fight back. His revenge wasn't just about payback. It was about reclaiming his dignity and taking back control of his life. Ethan's mind raced with thoughts of how to make Sarah pay for what she had done. For days he'd been planning, watching her every move, collecting pieces of evidence, and now he was ready to make his move. He had already made the decision. No more yelling, no more confrontation. His revenge would be quiet, methodical, and public. He would destroy the life Sarah had carefully built for herself, but he wouldn't do it with a simple argument or a betrayal of his own. No, Ethan had more finesse than that. He would use Sarah's affair against her, but not in a way she would expect. He would expose her, humiliate her, and make her face the consequences of her actions in the most devastating way possible. The first part of his plan was simple: gather more intel. Sarah had been trying to keep things secret, but Ethan had learned to watch the cracks in her facade. He began observing her interactions, tracking her phone, and even reaching out to people who might know about her affair with Daniel. But Ethan wasn't interested in just catching her in the act. He wanted to make her feel the humiliation of her choices. There was an upcoming dinner party that Sarah had been planning to attend with her friends. Ethan knew Daniel would be there as well. That's when he realized this was the perfect opportunity to expose her affair, right in front of the people who thought Sarah was the picture of loyalty and decency. Ethan's plan was to ensure that everyone at the party would find out about the affair, but not in a loud, dramatic confrontation. No, he would do it quietly. He would let Sarah's own lies unravel before everyone's eyes. He had already been digging through her phone and social media accounts, looking for any incriminating messages, photos, or clues that could expose the affair. There was one picture in particular, a photo Sarah had posted a few months back, innocently tagged with a caption about a great day with a friend, but Ethan had noticed something in the background, a hotel keycard on the coffee table. Ethan took a screenshot of the photo, saving it in his phone. It was the perfect piece of evidence. The night of the party arrived, and Ethan had already made sure everything was set up. He had arranged for an anonymous email to be sent to all the guests at the party. The email contained the photo of Sarah and Daniel, along with some pointed captions. The truth about Sarah and her secret affair with Daniel. The message was clear. Sarah's perfect life was about to come crashing down. As the party went on, Ethan slipped in and out of conversations, pretending nothing was wrong, all while watching the chaos that was about to unfold. He could already feel the tension building. People were starting to notice the odd look on his face, but Ethan didn't care. He wasn't there to talk. He was there to watch. His phone buzzed, and he saw the first few messages appear on his screen. The photo had been sent out and people were already reacting. Guests were now whispering to each other, some even walking over to Sarah, who had not yet seen the photo. Ethan could barely hide his smirk as he watched her face slowly turn pale. Sarah had always been so careful about her image. She had worked hard to be the perfect wife, the one everyone could rely on, the one everyone admired. But now she was about to lose all of that. The first person to approach Sarah was her best friend, who asked her about the photo. Sarah looked confused at first, then panicked as she saw the image. She quickly ran to her phone, but it was too late. The truth had already spread. Everyone in the room knew. Ethan had planned this perfectly. Sarah's betrayal was now exposed for all to see. First, Sarah tried to brush it off. She fumbled with her words, trying to explain that the picture was taken out of context, that it was just a friendly outing. But no one was buying it. The whispers were growing louder, and Sarah's calm facade was starting to crack. It was clear that her reputation, the very thing she held so dear, was crumbling before her eyes. Ethan stood off to the side, arms crossed, watching it all unfold. He didn't need to say a word. Sarah was doing all the talking for him, and her lies were falling apart with every desperate explanation she gave. He could hear her voice quiver as she tried to manipulate the situation, as she tried to salvage what little dignity she had left. But Ethan knew it was over for her. The truth was out. And then it happened. Sarah turned and saw Ethan standing there, his expression unreadable. She rushed over to him, grabbing his arm in an attempt to plead with him. "Ethan, please, you have to understand. It wasn't like that. I never meant to hurt you." Her words were shaky, but they fell on deaf ears. Ethan looked at her, his face cold. "You're right. It wasn't like that. It was worse." He pulled his arm away from her grasp. "You made your choice, Sarah. And now everyone knows what you did. Everyone knows the real you." He could see the fear in her eyes, the panic creeping into her voice as she tried to justify herself. "Please, Ethan, don't do this. I love you. I didn't mean for this to happen." But her words felt empty now. Ethan had no sympathy left for her. The love he had once felt had evaporated. He wasn't angry anymore, he was done. "You don't get to ask for forgiveness. Not after everything," Ethan said, his voice unwavering. He took one last look at Sarah, then turned and walked away. He had done what he set out to do. Sarah's life was now exposed for what it really was, a house of cards built on lies and deceit. In the aftermath, Sarah was left to pick up the pieces of her shattered world. She tried to call Ethan, send him messages, even beg him for a second chance, but it was too late. He had already moved on from her. The reality was that Ethan no longer cared. The life they had once shared, the trust they had built, was gone. And no amount of pleading or apologizing could change that. Sarah's friends were no longer speaking to her. Her reputation was tarnished beyond repair, and Daniel, who had once been her secret escape, now looked at her with a mixture of guilt and anger. Ethan had exposed the truth, and Sarah's world had collapsed. Ethan, however, didn't feel any sense of satisfaction from his revenge. As he walked away from the chaos, a part of him still ached for what he had lost. He had made Sarah feel the pain he had endured, but it wasn't enough to fill the emptiness inside him. Revenge, while sweet, had not brought the closure he had hoped for. Instead, it had shown him something even more important. His worth was not tied to Sarah or her betrayal. He was stronger now. He had taken control of his life again. And with that realization, Ethan knew it was time to finally move on. He had become someone new, a man who no longer needed the approval of those who had betrayed him. The party ended in chaos. Sarah's perfect image was shattered, and the damage was irreversible. Ethan didn't stick around to see the aftermath of his actions. He didn't need to. He knew what had happened. The whispers, the judgment, the looks of disbelief and disgust from their friends. Sarah's carefully curated life had fallen apart in a matter of hours. Ethan could imagine her trying to apologize, trying to explain, but it was all in vain. He was done with her. Sarah's messages and calls started pouring in as soon as he got home. She begged him to talk, to give her a chance to explain herself. She promised that it was all a mistake, that she never meant for things to go this far. But Ethan didn't even pick up the phone. He knew the truth, and no amount of pleading would change that. For days, Sarah's attempts at reconciliation continued, but Ethan remained firm. He had no interest in hearing her excuses or promises. He didn't want her words. He wanted action, but more than that, he wanted peace. In the quiet of his apartment, away from the drama of the betrayal, he could finally think clearly. But even then, there was something he couldn't shake, something deep inside him. Despite the rush of satisfaction he felt from exposing Sarah for what she truly was, there was a lingering emptiness that wouldn't go away. The emotional damage of the betrayal was still fresh, and Ethan realized that revenge, though it gave him a sense of justice, hadn't healed the wounds. It had only given him closure, but it didn't fill the void left by Sarah's lies. In the days following the exposure, Sarah tried everything she could think of to salvage what was left of their relationship. Her world had been turned upside down, and she was desperate to regain control. She reached out to Ethan, but this time her messages were different. They weren't just apologies, they were pleas for understanding. She tried to explain how she had fallen for Daniel, how she had been unhappy and made a huge mistake, how much she regretted what she had done. But Ethan couldn't look at her the same way anymore. The trust was gone, and it wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight. Every word Sarah spoke felt empty now. She had betrayed him in the worst way, and though she claimed she was sorry, Ethan knew better. Her apology wasn't for him, it was for her. She wanted him to forgive her, not because she truly regretted her actions, but because she couldn't face the reality of losing everything. One night, she showed up at his apartment, standing outside his door, tearful and desperate. She begged him to let her in, to talk, to try to fix what they had. But Ethan didn't even answer. He stood inside, looking at the door, his hand on the doorknob, and felt no impulse to open it. He had already opened his heart to her, and she had broken it. In the quiet aftermath of it all, Ethan began to realize something. He had given Sarah everything, his trust, his love, his future. But in the end, she had betrayed him. That wasn't on him, it was on her. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt a sense of power, of control. He didn't need Sarah to complete him. He didn't need anyone's approval to feel whole. The weeks after the breakup were difficult, of course. There were moments of sadness, moments when the betrayal felt too heavy to carry. But over time, those feelings faded, replaced by something stronger. Ethan realized that revenge, while it had given him some satisfaction, wasn't the path to healing. In fact, it had only been the first step. The real healing came from within. It came from learning to live for himself, from rediscovering the things that made him happy, independent of anyone else. He began focusing on his career again, dedicating himself to his work with a new sense of purpose. He reconnected with friends he had lost touch with over the years, the ones who had been there for him even before Sarah entered his life. And slowly but surely he started to rebuild. Ethan realized that he was stronger than he had ever given himself credit for. He didn't need to be defined by the betrayal he had suffered. His worth wasn't tied to Sarah or the failed relationship. It was tied to his ability to rise above it and move forward. Looking back on everything that had happened, Ethan felt a sense of peace settle in. The pain, the anger, the heartbreak. They were all fading memories now. The revenge had been sweet, yes, but it was only the first step toward reclaiming his life. Ethan had learned a valuable lesson. Revenge, while satisfying in the moment, doesn't fix the deeper issues. What he had needed wasn't justice, it was closure, the ability to let go of the past and move on. Ethan now understood that betrayal wasn't just about the person who hurt you, it was about how you respond to it. It was about finding the strength to heal, to rebuild, and to move forward without being defined by the mistakes of others. Ethan's journey was one of growth. He had taken back control of his life, and in doing so, he had found the peace he had been searching for all along. And as for Sarah, she was a chapter in his past. A painful chapter, but a chapter nonetheless. He had learned from it, and now he was moving forward, a stronger, wiser man. Ethan had taken back his life, and in doing so, he had become someone new. If you've ever experienced betrayal like this, you know how it feels to have your world turned upside down. But, like Ethan, you have the power to rise above it. Life isn't about what others do to you. It's about how you respond, how you take control of your own happiness. Ethan's story shows that revenge may give you temporary satisfaction, but true peace comes when you let go and rebuild. Have you ever faced a betrayal like Ethan's? How did you handle it? Drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts and share your experiences. And if you want to hear more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to Unheard Stories for more shocking tales of love, loss, and revenge. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode.